In the next section, we're going to look at just finding the domain of an equation that's been written out for a function. We won't have a picture. We won't have any idea what the picture looks like. We will just have an equation. So there's going to be two things that we're worried about when we just have an equation, and those are going to be the things that we know that mathematically you can't do. They're mathematical, what I say are no-nos. And your first mathematical no-no is if you have a fraction. What can't you do with fractions? Well, the one thing that you can't do, if you were to try it on a calculator, your calculator would pretty much yell at you and say, error, is that you cannot divide by 0. You can't have a denominator or a bottom equal to 0. So whatever your fraction is, whatever is down on the bottom, that cannot be 0. So that's our only no-no for fraction. The top can be 0, but definitely not the bottom. So that's the one thing that we're worried about with fractions, is whether or not our denominator or our bottom equals 0. The second problem that we're worried about is if we have an even root. What do we mean by an even root? Well, an even root would be, let's say, a square root, because there's a 2 on a square root, or a fourth root, or a sixth root. So notice by even, I'm meaning the number on the root, not what's inside of the root. Don't really care what's inside of the root, at least yet. So if we have an even root, remember, if you've seen roots before, you're worried about whatever is inside of them. Specifically, what's inside of them can't be negative, which means it needs to be greater than or equal to 0. So whatever's inside of our even roots needs to be greater than or equal to 0. And again, this only works if we're talking about even roots. Odd roots, we don't really care about. So what if, so these are my two special cases, fractions, and we're worried about whether or not the bottom equals 0, and even roots, I'm worried about whatever's inside of them needs to be greater than or equal to 0. This part will not change. It's always greater than or equal to 0. If you don't have a fraction that you're worried about, and you don't have an even root that you're worried about, though, then if you don't have any of those issues, then your domain will be negative infinity to infinity. So otherwise, if you don't have these two problems, if you don't have those two issues, then your domain is that you can plug in anything you want. You can plug in anything you want from negative infinity all the way up to positive infinity. So let's take a look. What we'll do to find the domains of these is we're going to go through our list of worries. One is whether or not we have a fraction. Well, in this first one, we don't even have a fraction, so not even going to talk about it. The second one, our second problem is, do we have an even root? Don't have one of those either. So I'm not running into any of my mathematical no-nos. So what does that mean? It means I can plug in whatever I want to my heart's content, so my domain will automatically be negative infinity to positive infinity. Let's try another one. Let's look at b. On b, we've got x squared plus 2x plus 5. That's our function graph. I don't know what that looks like. You don't need to. Just go through your checklist. 1, do we have a fraction? Nope. So don't even worry about it. 2, do we have an even root? We have an even exponent, but notice we don't have an even root. So nope, that's not a problem either. I have no even root and I have no fraction. So what does that mean? My two mathematical no-nos are non-existent, so I can plug in anything I want. I won't run into any issues. So my domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. Let's continue along. In C, we have